The last Thanksgiving I spent at my mother's house began with the smell of cinnamon and ended with the taste of blood in my mouth from biting my tongue. The Parker mansion looked like something out of a magazine. Warm lights, gold-trimmed china, and a camera crew my sister had hired to capture the perfect family dinner. But beneath the glow of chandeliers, everything felt staged. My mother, Evelyn Parker, 60, and terrifying in a wine-colored silk dress, stood at the head of the table, glass raised. To her left, my brother Grant wore that smug half-smile of a man who'd never heard the word no. My younger sister Haley angled her phone whispering to her followers about our family's annual Thanksgiving tradition. I sat quietly at the far end wondering when this performance would end. It did, just not the way any of them expected. My mother's toast began sweet, the kind of speech she'd practiced in mirrors for years. "Family is everything," she said, voice smooth as the Chardonnay in her hand. "And sometimes to protect that family, we have to make difficult decisions." She turned her gaze on me, her lips curving into something sharp. "Olivia, after your recent behavior, your father would have been ashamed. From this moment forward, you're cut off. No more trust fund, no more property, no more access to company accounts." The room went silent except for the faint click of Haley's camera capturing my humiliation. Grant smirked and leaned back, clearly enjoying the show. Someone at the other end whispered, "Finally." I stared at my mother, feeling heat rise behind my eyes, not from shame, but clarity. The woman who had once taught me manners now used them as weapons. She wanted tears, a plea, a scene she could control. I gave her none. I lifted my glass, slowly meeting her stare across the polished mahogany. "You're cutting me off?" I asked softly. "Completely," she said. "You made your choice when you turned your back on this family." For a moment, I thought of my father, of his calloused hands guiding mine as we sketched the blueprints for this very house. He'd told me integrity was the only inheritance worth fighting for. I swallowed the lump in my throat, let the wine roll over my tongue, and said evenly, "Then you might want to check the deed, Mom." A few guests laughed nervously, thinking it was sarcasm. But the way my mother froze the faint tremor in her glass told me she understood I wasn't bluffing. Grant frowned, glancing between us. "What does that mean?" he demanded. I didn't answer. I just smiled, calm and deliberate, as the tension spread through the room like smoke. Haley's phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the marble floor. "Olivia, what did you do?" My mother whispered, her voice suddenly small. For the first time in my life, she looked afraid of me. I placed my napkin on the table, stood, and said quietly, "I did what Dad taught me, protected what matters." Then I left the room, heels clicking in perfect rhythm with their panic. Behind me, I heard Grant's chair scrape back and my mother's voice break into a sharp command, but I didn't turn around. The air outside was cold, clean, honest. For the first time in years, so was I. By the time I was 10, I already understood that in the Parker family, love was measured by profit. My father, Richard Parker, had built Parker Development Group from scratch, a real estate empire that shaped half of the East Coast skyline. When he died suddenly of a heart attack 2 years ago, the empire didn't crumble, it calcified under my mother's iron control. Evelyn Parker was the kind of woman who could turn sympathy into currency. She wore grief like a designer coat, expensive, elegant, and completely detached from warmth. At 60, she looked 20 years younger and twice as dangerous. When she smiled at investors, they signed without reading. When she smiled at me, I checked for the knife. My brother Grant was 36 and the golden child. Groomed from birth to take over the business, he had the arrogance of someone who had never faced consequence. He called himself a visionary investor, though most of his visions ended with someone else cleaning up the mess. To my mother, he could do no wrong. Even his mistakes were learning opportunities. My sister Haley, 28, lived for the flash of a camera. She called herself an influencer, but what she really influenced was my mother's mood. She curated our family's image online, staging perfect holiday photos, hiding the rot beneath the marble floors. When she smiled, it was always for the feed. And then there was me, Olivia Parker, 32, the daughter who didn't follow the script. I'd studied architecture at Cornell, earned my own contracts, designed eco-homes upstate, and refused to take a position in the family firm. To my mother, that was betrayal. To me, it was survival. She told anyone who would listen that I was wasting my talent while Grant and Haley snickered behind her. My father used to call me the compass. He said I was the only one who could tell true north from ego. When he was alive, that meant something. After he died, my mother made sure it meant nothing. Within months, she rewrote company bylaws, naming herself permanent CEO and Grant as her successor. Haley became the brand ambassador for Parker Group's charitable branch, a convenient tax write-off. My name vanished from every document. At first, I didn't care. I had my own firm, my own income, my independence. But independence doesn't stop whispers. Every time there was a family gathering, I became the invisible guest, the one they mocked gently but publicly. Still living in that little cottage, Liv Grant would say, swirling his wine. Mom worries about you. It's hard to build a future when you walk away from power. Haley would giggle and film my discomfort for her relatable family moments. Even my mother's housekeeper, Teresa, began looking at me with pity. That hurt more than the insults. It was the quiet proof that I no longer belonged. When my father was alive, the mansion had been filled with music books and open doors. After he passed, it became a fortress of image management. The laughter at dinners was rehearsed. The conversations were transactions. My mother's empire grew, but so did the distance between us. She replaced empathy with efficiency, and her children became tools to maintain control. Sometimes late at night, I'd walk the halls of my father's old study. It still smelled faintly of cedar and ink. On his desk, a brass plaque read, "Integrity Builds." I used to think it was just a motto. Now it felt like a warning. The Parker family had built towers of glass and steel across the coast, but inside our own walls, everything was cracking. And as Thanksgiving approached that year, I had the sinking feeling that the fracture was about to split wide open. It started with a spreadsheet, one I wasn't supposed to see. 6 months before that Thanksgiving, I visited the mansion for my father's memorial dinner, a sterile event my mother hosted for donors, not family. After everyone left, I slipped into my father's old study, craving a trace of him. The room had changed. His books were gone, replaced by framed magazine covers of my mother and Grant. On the desk sat a folder labeled Parker Holdings Quarterly Review. I don't know why I opened it, only that something inside me needed to. The numbers didn't add up. Transactions listed as consulting fees to offshore accounts, real estate assets sold at undervalued prices, and massive loans that never seemed to return. My architectural brain noticed pattern symmetry where there shouldn't be. Someone was draining the company quietly, surgically. I printed the pages, folded them into my bag, and took them home. That night, I stared at the papers under lamplight, heart pounding with a mix of dread and recognition. It wasn't just business mismanagement. It was laundering. The following morning, I called my mother. "I need to talk to you," I said, "about the company finances." Her voice chilled instantly. "That's not your concern, Olivia. It is if Parker Development is being used for fraud." She laughed softly, the kind of laugh she used to humiliate people without raising her tone. "You've been out of the company for years. Don't embarrass yourself trying to understand high-level strategy." I swallowed hard. "Grant's name is on these accounts. Are you aware Grant knows what he's doing?" she snapped. "He's ensuring our long-term liquidity." "You wouldn't understand." "I understand theft when I see it," I said quietly. The silence that followed was thick. Then she whispered, "Be very careful, Olivia. Family loyalty comes first." And she hung up. The next day, my brother called. "Mom tells me you've been snooping," he said, his tone smug. "If you're trying to play detective, don't. You'll just hurt yourself. Grant, I found documents showing." "You found what we let you find." He cut in. "Don't delude yourself. You don't know the rules of this game anymore." His words were calm, confident, rehearsed. It wasn't just arrogance. It was threat wrapped in charm. I hung up shaking. Over the next few weeks, small things happened that made me realize how deep it went. My email was hacked. My name appeared in company gossip blogs as the estranged daughter with jealousy issues. Haley posted a video titled "Toxic Family Energy," featuring a blurry figure suspiciously resembling me crying outside a cafe. The comments were brutal. "Spoiled brat," they called me. "Ungrateful." "Crazy." My clients started backing out of contracts. One whispered that my family had called me unstable. That was when I understood the scope of it. They weren't just protecting their money. They were erasing me systematically, publicly, and emotionally. I remember sitting in my apartment that night watching Haley's video hit 500,000 views, hearing her fake apology in the next clip. "I just wish my sister would stop causing drama," she said tearfully to her followers. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "Let this go or I'll make sure you have nothing left to lose." I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. The woman who'd given me life was threatening to destroy mine. I closed my laptop, pulled my father's old blueprint of the family estate from my drawer, and spread it on the table. My hands trembled, but my mind was clear. I wasn't going to fight them with rage. I was going to use the one thing they'd all forgotten my father taught me: structure. And every structure, no matter how grand, collapses when its foundation rots. The next few months taught me what it really meant to grow up inside a toxic family. I'd always known my mother could be cruel, but until then, I hadn't realized she could weaponize affection. She'd call at random hours, her tone syrupy sweet, asking if I'd thought about apologizing yet. Then, when I didn't answer the way she wanted, her voice would harden into steel. "You're making a spectacle of yourself," she'd hiss. "You're humiliating this family." The irony of that was breathtaking. My brother Grant, meanwhile, treated me like a case study in how to dismantle someone's confidence. He'd show up at my apartment unannounced, standing in the doorway like a debt collector. "Mom's worried about you," he'd say, smiling too wide. "You look tired. Maybe you should take a vacation, somewhere quiet, somewhere far." His hand would linger on my shoulder, just a little too long, friendly on the surface, but heavy, controlling. And Haley, she was the digital assassin. Every time I opened my phone, her curated lies followed me. "Family isn't about blood," she'd caption beneath a photo of herself and my mother, laughing over dinner, both dressed in matching cream sweaters. "It's about loyalty." Thousands of her followers commented hearts. I read the comments until they blurred together, realizing they weren't just talking about family. They were talking about me. Behind closed doors, my mother had started referring to me as the liability. At charity galas, she'd pretend I was on a creative sabbatical. At board meetings, she'd erase my name entirely. When one journalist reached out to ask about rumors of tension among the Parkers, she released a statement calling me estranged due to personal struggles. I wasn't just being punished, I was being rewritten. But the true poison of a toxic family isn't the lies they tell the world. It's the lies they tell you until you start believing them. I caught myself one night whispering apologies into the dark, though I hadn't done anything wrong. I hated that they could still make me feel small. I hated that a part of me still wanted their approval. My therapist, the only person I could talk to without consequence, once said, "Olivia, families like this survive because they make you question your reality. The antidote is proof." Proof. That word stayed with me. Proof of what they were doing. Proof that my father's legacy was being twisted. Proof that I wasn't crazy. So I started documenting everything. Screenshots of emails, photos of documents, even audio from Grant's visits when he thought he was intimidating me. Every night, I labeled and stored files in an encrypted drive. Each piece was a brick in the wall I was building, not to protect myself from them, but to trap them inside the truth. Still, some nights the guilt clawed at me. I'd remember my father's voice, patient and kind, telling me to forgive quickly, to lead with heart. But he'd also said, "Never let anyone build on rotten ground." I realized he wasn't just talking about architecture. He was talking about them. The Parkers had built their kingdom on manipulation, vanity, and silence silence had kept them powerful. So I stopped being silent. The first crack in their perfect facade came when I contacted an old family associate, a lawyer who'd once been loyal to my father. I didn't know it then, but that single act would expose the one secret my mother had buried even deeper than her cruelty. It wasn't money. It was truth. His name was Martin Holloway, and I hadn't seen him since my father's funeral. Back then, he'd been a quiet presence. Silver hair, sharp suit, eyes that missed nothing. When I called and introduced myself, there was a long pause on the line. Then, in a voice roughened by age and secrets, he said, "I've been expecting this call, Olivia." We met in a small law office outside Richmond, far from the glass towers my mother now used as her throne. Martin still kept the same walnut desk my father had given him decades ago, carved with initials beneath the varnish. Your father knew this day might come. He began pouring 2 cups of black coffee. He asked me to wait until I believed you were ready to hear the truth. I stiffened. What truth? Martin slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside were photocopies of legal deeds, trust documents, and 1 envelope sealed in my father's handwriting. Richard's final amendment to his estate wasn't fully disclosed to the family, he said. Your mother was insistent on managing the process, but Richard anticipated her control. My hands trembled as I unfolded the deed. There, in black ink, were the words, Olivia Parker, joint owner of the Parker family estate and Parker Creek property, 50%. I blinked. Joint owner. This can't be right. It's right, Martin said quietly. Your father recorded it himself. He wanted to ensure the heart of his company, the land, the home, the legacy would never fall into the wrong hands. You are the legal co-owner of the entire estate and its primary holdings. My pulse thundered in my ears. Why didn't anyone tell me? Martin leaned back. Your mother instructed me to keep you out of the process. She said you didn't care about the family business. He hesitated, then added, I saw the paperwork she submitted. It was a secondary version your name removed. But your father's original deed was already filed with the county registrar. My father had protected me in silence. He must have known how easily my mother could twist things after his death. I opened the sealed envelope with shaking fingers. Inside was a letter written in his familiar architect's scrawl. Liv, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and Evelyn is running the show. You were always the one who saw the cracks before they broke. If this family loses its way, remember the foundation. I built this house for your mother, but the ground it sits on belongs to you. Use it wisely. Tears blurred the words, falling onto the paper like rain on blueprints. Martin, I whispered, does she know I have this? He shook his head. No, and she can't. Yet. I sat there, the reality sinking in. For years they'd treated me like an outsider when all along I'd been the one holding the foundation of their empire. Martin's gaze softened. Richard believed integrity wasn't just a word. He built safeguards around it. You are one of them. As I left his office, the late afternoon sun caught the edge of the document folder in my hands, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt since my father's passing: leverage. But it wasn't about money. It was about truth. On the drive home, I stopped by the Parker estate gates. From the outside, the mansion gleamed columns, perfect windows, spotless. But I knew what was underneath now. My father's letter echoed in my head like an oath. The ground it sits on belongs to you. My mother could polish the surface all she wanted. The land itself was mine, and soon she was going to learn that foundation always wins over facade. Thanksgiving arrived wrapped in expensive silence. The Parker estate shimmered under a canopy of lights that could have powered a small town. My mother loved her displays of wealth more than she loved people. Every guest who stepped through those carved mahogany doors was greeted not by warmth but by performance. I hadn't planned to go, not until I realized the timing couldn't be better. My father's will, the hidden deed, the accounts, they all pointed to a truth I was finally ready to unveil. The plan was simple. I'd let them show their cruelty before I showed them their reckoning. The drive up the long, frost-coated road to the mansion felt surreal. The closer I got, the heavier the air seemed to grow. The house loomed against the dusk, its white columns glowing in the twilight. Inside, laughter spilled from the dining room, Haley's high-pitched social media laugh, Grant's baritone, Bragg's my mother's velvet-toned control. Teresa, the housekeeper, greeted me at the door, her eyes flickering with something like pity. They're all waiting. Miss Olivia, she whispered, pressing a small hand over mine. Be careful tonight. I smiled faintly. Don't worry, I will. The dining room looked like a magazine cover, gilded plates, crystal goblets, a turkey carved to perfection. Grant stood at the head of the table, not Dad's old spot, but close enough to pretend. Well, well, he said, raising his glass. If it isn't the prodigal architect. Still building things, I said lightly. Some structures last longer than others. Haley giggled, flicking her phone camera toward me. "We were just saying how nice it is you showed up. Mom was worried you'd miss another family event." My mother sat at the far end, Pearl's glinting smile sharp. "We're family, after all," she said, "even when we disagree." "Disagree?" I echoed. "That's one way to describe fraud." Her fork froze midair. Grant's smile tightened. "Still chasing ghosts, Liv." Maybe I found something more substantial. I reached into my bag and placed a thin folder beside my plate. The air shifted. Haley stopped recording. My mother's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" she asked softly. "Having dinner," I said. "And then discussing ownership." "Ownership." Grant snorted. "You mean your delusions about Dad's company?" "No," I said calmly, sliding the document toward her. "I mean the deed, the estate, the land beneath your feet." My mother didn't touch the paper, but I saw her pulse jump at her throat. "What nonsense! Dad filed it himself." I interrupted, my tone even but unshakable. "You forged a secondary copy. You removed my name, but the county kept the original." The silence was absolute now. Grant's glass slipped from his hand and shattered against the table's edge. "You can't prove that," he said hoarsely. I looked him dead in the eye. "I already have." From my coat pocket, I pulled out Martin Holloway's notarized statement, sealed and signed. Dad wanted me to protect what mattered. He left me half this property, half of everything you're standing on. Haley's face went pale. "Mom." My mother's voice came out low and trembling for the first time I'd ever heard. "You don't understand, Olivia. Your father wasn't well when he wrote that. He was more lucid than you think I said. He knew what was coming." I stood then, my voice rising just enough to command the room. "You've spent years tearing down what he built with deceit and greed. But tonight I'm done watching. You wanted me cut off, fine. Check the deed, Mother. You've been dining in my house." For a moment, no one moved. Then Grant lunged for the folder, but my mother stopped him, her manicured hand trembling. The truth had finally landed. And for the first time in my life, Evelyn Parker looked afraid. It happened fast and slow all at once, the kind of moment that stretches time, thin like the air before a storm. My mother's face drained of color, her lips tightening as she read the notarized seal on the deed. Around her, guests exchanged nervous glances, pretending not to eavesdrop while every eye was fixed on us. Grant was the first to recover. He slammed his hand on the table, the crystal rattling. "This is manipulation," he barked. "Dad would never." "He did," I cut in. "He filed it himself. The registrar's timestamp is dated 3 months before he died." My voice stayed steady, but I felt the heat of years' worth of humiliation burning through my chest. "You've been selling assets that don't belong to you, using shell companies to move money into your own accounts." I turned to Haley. "And you've been helping him. I traced your influencer payments' fake contracts used to launder company funds. You thought no one would notice because they were hidden under marketing outreach." Haley's breath hitched and her mascaraed eyes went wide. "That's not true." I reached into my coat and pulled out a thin USB drive, sliding it across the table like a blade. Every transfer, every false invoice, every account. The trail is all there. I gave copies to the auditor and to Martin Holloway, who's filing an injunction as we speak. Gasps rippled through the room. My mother's glass shattered against the floor, shards catching the chandelier's light. "You went to outsiders," she hissed. "You would humiliate your family publicly." "You already did that to yourselves," I said softly. "I just turned on the lights." Grant lunged from his chair, grabbing my arm hard enough to bruise. "You think you can destroy us?" His voice was venom. "You're nothing without this family's name." I stared at him, calm, unflinching. "That's where you're wrong, Grant. I made my own name. You're the one who'll have to explain to federal investigators why millions vanished under your signature." He froze, and for the first time I saw fear behind his anger. The kind of fear that comes when someone realizes the ground under them is no longer theirs. My mother stood slowly, shoulders trembling with rage. "You ungrateful child," she spat. "Everything you have came from me." "No," I said quietly. "It came from Dad. and he wanted it protected from exactly this. I took a step back, surveying the opulent room, the guests, the tension that hung thick as smoke. You taught me that image is everything, Mom, so let's make this one last image worth remembering. I looked toward the main camera Haley had set up for her live stream, still blinking red. Happy Thanksgiving, I said, voice calm, razor-edged. Let's all be grateful for the truth. Gasps erupted, followed by chaos. Grant cursed Haley, tried to grab the camera, and my mother shouted orders that no one obeyed. Guests began leaving, murmuring, the air filled with the metallic scent of fear and wine. I walked out through the grand entry hall, past the portraits of Parker ancestors glaring down from gilded frames. My father's face in the largest one seemed to meet my eyes, almost proud. Outside, the cold night hit like clean water. Behind me, voices rose. Grant shouting about lawyers, my mother sobbing something about betrayal. I didn't turn around. The empire had cracked from within, exactly as it should, and as I stepped off the porch into the biting wind, I realized the one thing my mother had never understood: sometimes the only way to save a family name is to burn it down to its foundations and rebuild it on truth. By the next morning, the Parker mansion looked like a battlefield dressed in crystal. Half the guests had fled before dessert, and the rest left whispers that would echo across every boardroom in the state. I woke up in my small apartment with my phone vibrating, non-stop missed calls, unread messages, and headlines already circulating online. Thanksgiving shock at Parker Estate, family feud goes public. My sister's live stream had done what I never could. It stripped away the illusion. The world finally saw the Parkers not as a dynasty, but as a disaster. My lawyer Martin called before sunrise. They're panicking, he said, sounding almost impressed. Evelyn's legal team tried to file a counterclaim last night to challenge the deed, but we already submitted the original to the county office. It's legally untouchable. What about the investigation I asked? Already in motion, he replied. The auditors confirmed fraudulent transfers under Grant's and Haley's names. The feds have been alerted. I closed my eyes, breathing in the quiet that didn't feel like victory, yet just aftermath. By noon, my mother's PR machine had sputtered to life. News anchors replayed clips from the dinner, her voice trembling as she said, "My daughter is confused, grieving, and being manipulated by outsiders." It might have worked if not for the leaked evidence. Screenshots of her forged signatures, the missing millions, and a photo of the notarized deed began circulating through investor circles. Stock in Parker Development dipped 8% in a single day. The facade was collapsing faster than even I anticipated. That evening, I drove out to the estate again. Police cars lined the driveway, their blue lights flashing softly against the manicured hedges. Through the frosted glass of the front doors, I saw Grant pacing as 2 agents questioned him. Haley sat on the stairs, makeup streaked, clutching her phone like a lifeline. My mother was nowhere in sight. When she finally appeared, she looked smaller. No pearls, no perfect posture, just a woman cornered by consequences. "You've destroyed us," she said when she saw me. "You destroyed yourself," I replied. "I just refused to keep pretending." Her eyes flicked to the officers behind her, then back to me. "Do you know what you've done to this family's name?" "Yes," I said. I cleaned it. The words seemed to pierce her because for once she didn't have a comeback, just silence, the kind that weighed heavier than shouting. As I turned to leave, Grant called after me. "You'll regret this." "Liv, you think they'll make you a hero? You're as tainted as the rest of us." I stopped at the threshold, the cold air biting my face. "Maybe," I said. "But I'm free." The door shut behind me with a final satisfying click. Over the next few days, headlines multiplied. Parker Development suspended operations pending federal review. Grant resigned from all leadership roles under mutual agreement. Haley lost every sponsorship overnight. Brands don't like scandals that trend for the wrong reasons. And Evelyn Parker, Queen of Perfection, vanished from public view, citing health reasons. But the real reckoning came in private. Martin called again 2 days later. "They're offering a settlement," he said. "Your mother wants to transfer her remaining shares to you in exchange for dropping the criminal complaints." I stared out my window at the city skyline my family had built and ruined. "Tell her I don't want her money," I said. Just a public statement admitting what she did. Martin paused, then exhaled. "That'll destroy her." "Good," I said quietly. "Now she knows how it feels." For the first time, the Parker legacy belonged to someone who cared about the truth. And the cost of that truth betrayal, humiliation, exile felt worth every breath of freedom it bought. The press conference was my idea. I knew it would cut deeper than any courtroom. The Parkers had always worshipped image, so I chose the most public altar possible. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I stood in front of a wall of microphones at the county courthouse, the morning air crisp, reporters jostling for position. Cameras clicked like gunfire. I wore black, simple, professional, not mourning, but clean slate. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady, even though my heart pounded hard enough to shake the podium. "My name is Olivia Parker. For years, my family's company, Parker Development Group, was a symbol of integrity and innovation. What the public didn't see was the corruption inside its walls." I paused just long enough for the silence to thicken. "I have provided evidence to federal authorities confirming years of financial misconduct by senior company members. These actions endangered hundreds of employees and betrayed the values my father built this company on. Today, I want to make one thing clear: integrity will no longer be optional at Parker." Flashbulbs erupted. Questions shouted over one another. "Miss Parker, did your mother participate in the fraud? What about your brother and sister?" I raised a hand, quieting them. "All evidence has been turned over to investigators. I will not discuss the details, but yes, responsibility will fall where it belongs." I could almost feel my mother's fury from miles away, but I didn't care. For once, the narrative wasn't hers. It was mine. Afterward, I stepped into the cold sunlight, feeling a strange calm. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters, but somewhere in the back near the marble column stood a man who looked oddly familiar. When he stepped forward, I recognized him: Lucas, our former CFO, the one Grant had fired a year ago under performance issues. "Miss Parker," he said quietly, "I just wanted to thank you. I lost my job because I refused to falsify reports. I thought no one would ever stand up to them." He handed me an envelope. "You might need this." Inside were additional bank statements, emails, even an old recording, Grant admitting he forged Dad's signature on multiple transactions. It was the missing piece. "Why give it to me?" I asked. Lucas smiled faintly. "Because your father once told me you were the only honest Parker left." Guess he was right. That night, the story broke nationwide. The Parker scandal: daughter exposes family empire. News anchors dissected every detail. My inbox flooded with messages, some hateful, many grateful. Former employees reached out thanking me for protecting their pensions. Investors offered to back a reformed Parker Group under new leadership. My mother predictably refused to appear. Her lawyer released a statement calling the event a family misunderstanding exaggerated by grief. But her silence spoke louder than any denial. Then came the arrest warrants. Grant was charged with corporate fraud and money laundering. Haley faced charges of accessory and false documentation. My mother avoided jail only by cooperating, turning over her records, admitting knowledge of Grant's schemes. For her, that admission was the deepest wound. The tabloids called it the fall of the Queen. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. Justice wasn't a victory parade. It was a dismantling, quiet and cold. When I visited my father's grave that week, the December air bit at my hands. I laid down a single white rose and whispered, "I fixed it, Dad." For a long moment, I just stood there watching snow settle on his name. The man who built everything had also built the map I'd followed to save it. And though the cost had been heavy family trust illusion, it had finally brought me back to something pure. Truth. The kind my father believed in. The kind my mother could never fake. The weeks after the arrests felt like walking through the ruins of a once beautiful cathedral. The Parker name, once whispered with envy, had become shorthand for greed and deceit. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel ashamed of it. I felt clean. The mansion sat empty now, its grand foyer stripped of portraits, the chandeliers dimmed. The servants had been dismissed, the cars gone. Only Teresa, the old housekeeper who'd been there since my childhood, remained. When I stopped by to collect my father's things, she met me at the door with red eyes. "Your mother's upstairs," she whispered. "She hasn't left that room in days." I hesitated. I hadn't planned to see her again. But something in Teresa's tone, part sorrow, part plea, made me climb the marble stairs. My mother's suite was dark curtains drawn against the winter light. She sat at her dressing table, her reflection fractured across the mirrors she'd once used to perfect herself. Without her pearls, without her armor, she looked fragile, smaller, almost human. "You came," she said softly, not turning. "I didn't think you would. I wasn't sure I should." She gave a faint, bitter smile. "You got what you wanted. The truth. The throne. I never wanted your throne, Mom. I wanted honesty." She turned, then her eyes hollow but lucid. "Do you know what it's like to build an empire from nothing, to have people wait for you to stumble so they can feast on your failure? I did what I had to." "No," I said quietly. "You did what made you powerful. Dad built something lasting. You built something that fed on fear." Her lip trembled. "He always said you were too much like him. That's the only compliment you've ever given me." We stared at each other, two women who had spent their lives circling the same wound. For a second, I almost pitied her. Then she whispered, "I lost everything." "No," I said, stepping closer. "You traded everything." She didn't respond, just turned back toward the mirror, adjusting her reflection as if she could fix it. I left the room quietly, closing the door on her empire of glass. Downstairs, Teresa handed me a small wooden box. "Your father wanted you to have this," she said. Inside was his old watch, scratched heavy, the one he wore on every job site. Engraved on the back were 3 words, "Integrity builds forever." My throat tightened. I slipped it onto my wrist, the weight grounding me. That night I drove back to the city past the skyline my family once owned, piece by piece. News reports confirmed what I already knew. Grant had pleaded guilty, cutting a deal to avoid prison time, his smug grin replaced by defeat. Haley had posted a tearful apology video, her follower count dropping faster than her tears. And my mother had quietly transferred her remaining shares to me, exactly as I'd demanded. The empire was mine now, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like responsibility. I called a meeting with the company board. "Parker Development is under new management," I told them. "No more shell companies, no fake philanthropy. We rebuild ethically, transparently, and from the ground up." Some resisted, some left, but the ones who stayed believed. It took months to stabilize, but slowly the company began to breathe again. We restored employee benefits, reopened, halted projects, and rehired the workers my brother had fired to fund his parties. Every blueprint approved, every dollar accounted for. It became my quiet rebellion against the past. Late one night, I looked out from my office window at the city lights below and whispered, "We're back, Dad. Not richer, just right." And for the first time in decades, I felt something my family had forgotten how to feel: peace. A year passed. The Parker name no longer appeared in gossip headlines, only in business journals, and for good reasons this time. The company had survived its implosion and come back leaner, cleaner, and for the first time, honest. The employees who had once whispered about scandals now smiled when they passed me in the halls. We were smaller, but we were proud. The new Parker development wasn't about empires anymore. It was about people. We started rebuilding affordable housing projects, the kind my father always wanted to do, but my mother dismissed as charity without return. I renamed one of them Integrity Estates. It felt poetic, closing the circle he'd started. One gray morning in November, a letter arrived on my desk, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. My mother's, Olivia. It began, "By the time you read this, I will have left Connecticut. The estate has been sold. I don't expect forgiveness, but I owe you the truth. I spent a lifetime chasing admiration and found only emptiness. You didn't destroy our family. You freed us from the lies we built. I see that now. Take care of what your father built and of yourself." Mother. I sat back reading it twice. There were no tears left between us, only a quiet acknowledgement of what we'd both lost and what I'd managed to save. Later that week, I visited Grant. He was serving a community restitution sentence teaching financial literacy classes at a halfway center. His arrogance had been replaced by something I'd never seen in him before: humility. "Didn't think you'd come," he said, almost shy. "I didn't come for you," I replied, then softened. "Maybe I came for both of us." He nodded slowly. "You did what none of us had the guts to. You stopped her." "I didn't stop her," I said. "I stopped what she made us believe." When I left, he hugged me not out of love, maybe not even remorse, but out of understanding. It was enough. Haley called next. She'd moved to Colorado away from the spotlight, working for a nonprofit that built homes for single mothers. Her voice trembled when she said, "I finally know what real work feels like." I smiled genuinely. "That's good, Hales. Maybe you'll start influencing the right things now." We both laughed, a sound that felt almost like childhood again. In January, the company hosted a charity gala, the first one we'd done under my leadership. No flashy chandeliers, no performative speeches, just gratitude. We raised enough to fund 3 new housing projects. As I gave my closing remarks, I looked out at the crowd, employees, families, people who believed in second chances, and I thought of my parents. My father's watch ticked steadily against my wrist. My mother's absence hovered like a ghost, but not a cruel one anymore, just a reminder of the cost of pride. When the applause faded and the lights dimmed, I stepped outside into the snow. The night air bit cold against my cheeks, but the silence felt earned. A familiar voice broke it, Teresa. The housekeeper, now retired, but still family in every way that mattered. "Your father would be proud," she said softly. I turned to her, smiling. "I think he'd say we finally built something worth keeping." "And your mother?" she asked gently. I thought about that for a long moment before answering. She built something too. A warning. Teresa nodded as snowflakes drifted between us. "Then you both honored him." The city glowed in the distance, the skyline my father once dreamed into existence, now a monument to what we'd rebuilt from ashes. Redemption wasn't loud or perfect. It was steady, deliberate, and merciful. And for the first time since I was a child, I felt home. Exactly 1 year after that fateful Thanksgiving, I returned to the Parker estate, though it wasn't ours anymore. The gates were open, the grounds quieter than I'd ever seen them. A small plaque by the entrance read, "Parker Memorial Preserve," dedicated to Richard and Elizabeth Parker for their commitment to integrity and community. The county had bought the property and turned it into a public park, just as I'd suggested in the settlement. Standing at the foot of the grand staircase, now stripped of its gold railings and filled with sunlight, I felt something unexpected: peace, not possession. The mansion had never been home, but now, with its doors open to everyone, it finally had purpose. Teresa met me by the old oak tree where my father used to drink coffee on quiet mornings. "You did it, Miss Olivia," she said, her voice trembling. "You brought this place back to life." I smiled. "He would have liked that." She squeezed my hand. "He would have liked what you became even more." I looked out across the snow-dusted lawn where children now played and couples walked their dogs. "You know," I said softly, "Dad used to say buildings outlast people. I think he was wrong. The good we build inside them, that's what lasts." After Teresa left, I wandered into my father's old study now, a reading room for visitors. The cedar scent was faint, but still there. On the wall hung his motto, "Integrity builds forever." Someone had restored the brass plaque I'd taken years ago and placed it above the fireplace. I traced the words with my fingers, remembering the girl who once thought those letters were just decoration. Now I knew better. I sat down at the desk and opened my notebook, the one where I kept the company's next phase plans. We'd partnered with several nonprofits, created grants for young architects, and set up a scholarship in my father's name. The Parker Foundation had gone from scandal to symbol of reform. But as I wrote, I realized the legacy wasn't just his anymore. It was mine. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Grant, just 3 words, "Proud of you, Liv." It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd ever expected. A few minutes later, Haley texted a photo of a small house under construction in Colorado. Her caption simple, "We're calling it Integrity House." I smiled, closing my eyes for a moment. Maybe redemption could ripple outward after all. Later that afternoon, I locked up the study and walked toward the garden where the last of the roses still clung to life in the winter frost. My mother had loved these roses, the only thing she ever tended to herself. And beneath that rosebed near the edge of the fountain was a small bronze marker I'd placed quietly months ago. Evelyn Parker, 1960 to 2024. She built, she broke, she learned. It wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. She'd passed quietly in her sleep earlier that spring alone, but peaceful somewhere in a small town by the sea. Her last letter to me found among her things was short. I hope you remember me as a woman who tried even when she failed. I did, because failure I'd learned wasn't the opposite of legacy, it was part of it. As dusk fell, I stood beneath the oak tree, the wind whispering through its branches. The house behind me glowed softly, filled with laughter and life, not owned by greed anymore. I took a breath and whispered, "It's done, Dad." Then I turned toward the gate, walking away. Not as the disinherited daughter they once mocked, but as the woman who had rewritten what inheritance truly meant. My story wasn't about revenge, it was about rebuilding. About how sometimes you have to lose everything status family illusion to gain what really matters. Integrity, peace, and the freedom to start again. Have you ever had to stand up to your own family to do what was right? Tell me in the comments. And remember, sometimes the best inheritance isn't land or money. It's the courage to build something honest from the ruins.